In the small, desolate town of Black Hollow, there was an abandoned house on the outskirts that everyone knew to stay away from. Whispers surrounded the place, tales of disappearances and eerie happenings. No one remembered when it was last lived in, but it had always been there, like an unsettling scar on the land. Lena, a curious young woman with a penchant for exploring forgotten places, had heard the rumors but never quite believed them. Old houses can't hurt you, she reasoned. One foggy afternoon, she decided to go see for herself. She drove through the twisting, narrow roads, the fog thickening as she neared the house. The air grew colder, the trees around her bending unnaturally in the wind. She reached the house and parked her car, her breath visible in the freezing air. The house loomed before her, its broken windows like empty eyes staring into her soul. It was larger than she had imagined, a crumbling, decaying structure with a grand porch and a set of dark, iron doors. Lena hesitated at the threshold but, driven by her desire to unravel the mystery, pushed the doors open. They creaked loudly, echoing in the stillness. The inside was dim, the only light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, and the smell of old wood and mildew filled her nostrils. She explored the house room by room, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. It was strange. Despite the decay, there were still signs of life. An old rocking chair in one corner, swaying slightly, even though the house was still. An overturned photograph on the floor, the faces blurred with age. And then, the sound, a soft, shuffling noise coming from upstairs. Lena froze. The house was supposed to be abandoned. Her heart raced, and her instincts screamed at her to leave. But her curiosity was too strong. She tiptoed up the narrow staircase, the boards creaking under her weight. As she reached the top, the noise stopped. She stood in the hallway, listening to the silence. A door at the far end of the hall was slightly ajar, a faint light leaking through the crack. Lena pushed it open, and the smell of rot hit her hard. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a flickering candle on the floor, surrounded by strange markings on the walls, symbols she couldn't understand. But it was the figure in the corner that caught her eye. A tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and skin as pale as death, standing perfectly still. His gaze locked onto hers, and a chill ran down her spine. He didn't move, didn't speak. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the room with the man. The candle flickered violently, casting strange shadows on the walls, and the man began to speak, his voice a low rasp that echoed through her skull. "You shouldn't have come here," he croaked. "You've awakened it." The room grew colder, the shadows stretching impossibly long. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she turned, desperately searching for an escape. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. She stumbled backward, her eyes never leaving the man as he slowly raised his hand, his fingers curling like claws. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in on her, the house alive with an unseen force, a presence that pressed in from all sides. She tried to run, but the house twisted around her, the hallway elongating, the staircase stretching higher and higher. Panicking, Lena reached for the window, but as her fingers touched the glass, it shattered, and a loud, shrill scream echoed from deep within the house, an agonizing, inhuman sound. She spun around to find herself face to face with dozens of figures, emerging from the dark corners, their eyes glowing red with malice. They circled her, their mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. "You should have stayed away," the man whispered one last time. "The last thing Lena sa." When Lena's body was found 2 days later, it was lying in the front yard of the old house, cold and lifeless. Her eyes were wide open, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The local sheriff, a hardened man named Greg, was the first to arrive on the scene, his boots crunching the frost-covered grass as he surveyed the eerie surroundings. The town had long given up on solving the mysteries of the house, but this was different. This wasn't just another vanishing. Lena's body had been carefully placed in front of the house, almost like an offering. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale and bruised, but the most disturbing detail was her eyes. They were still wide open, but they no longer looked human. Instead, they had taken on a deep, unnatural blackness, like two endless pits of darkness. Greg felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at her, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had seen things before, things that the townspeople preferred to ignore. As he walked through the house, the air grew colder. The floorboards groaned under his weight, and every step seemed to echo through the silence like a warning. Greg had never been inside the house, and as he moved deeper into its heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching him. In the dim light, the walls were covered with strange symbols, and the air felt thick with something heavy, like the very essence of dread itself. He reached the staircase, the same staircase Lena had ascended, and as his foot hit the first step, the creaking was deafening. His hand brushed the railing, and for a brief moment, it felt alive. It was warm, almost pulsing, as though the house was feeding off his touch. But what disturbed Greg the most was the sensation, the undeniable feeling that someone else was there, just beyond the edge of his vision. He quickly turned, but the hallway remained empty. A whisper came from the shadows. A low, unsettling voice, soft but persistent. "Leave. Before it's too late." Greg spun around, his heart racing. Nothing. Only the darkness. But then, as he passed the doorway at the end of the hall, he froze. For the first time in his life, he felt his breath catch in his throat. The room beyond was eerily familiar. It was the same room Lena had been in. The candle was still flickering, the symbols still glowing faintly, but now the walls seemed to pulse. They were alive, and there, standing in the center of the room, was the man. His pale, gaunt face was frozen in a grotesque grin, his eyes two pits of black voids that seemed to reach into Greg's very soul. His long fingers twitched, almost as if beckoning Greg to come closer. The whisper came again, but this time it was louder, almost desperate. "You shouldn't be here. You don't know what you've unleashed." Before Greg could turn and flee, the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside the cursed room. The candlelight flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, and the temperature plummeted. His breath clouded in the air, and he could hear the faintest scratching sounds, like claws dragging against the walls. And then, he heard it, a low rumbling noise, coming from deep within the house. It was a growl, low and guttural, as though something ancient and hungry was waking up. Greg tried to turn the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose in his chest as the growl grew louder, closer. His skin prickled, his heart racing. The room began to shake, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward him, reaching for him with invisible hands. "Get out." The voice wasn't from the man anymore. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting in the darkness for centuries. With a burst of adrenaline, Greg backed into the corner, his eyes darting around for a way out. He grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor, brandishing it like a weapon. But before he could act, the floor beneath him cracked open, a dark void consuming. Days passed, and the town of Black Hollow grew restless. The sheriff had disappeared, and the people began to talk more openly about the house. Some swore it was cursed. Others said it was haunted by vengeful spirits. But there was one thing they all agreed on. Something in that house was awake. And it was getting stronger. A group of locals, desperate to put an end to the nightmare, decided to investigate the house once more. But none of them returned. The house, now darker and more sinister than ever, stood in the fog, waiting. And it was only a matter of time before the next person, someone else, drawn by the house's evil pull, would wander too close, and become part of its endless hunger. Weeks had passed since the last disappearance, and Black Hollow seemed to hold its breath. People avoided the area surrounding the house, their eyes darting nervously whenever they passed by the old property. Rumors spread like wildfire, some saying the house itself had come alive, its walls pulsating like the heart of some ancient beast. But none of the stories had prepared them for what would happen next. It was late one night when Jamie, a young and ambitious journalist, arrived in Black Hollow, determined to uncover the truth. She had heard of the house's dark reputation from her grandmother, who had warned her to stay away. But Jamie was fearless, the thrill of uncovering long-forgotten secrets too alluring to resist. Armed with only a flashlight, her recorder, and a determination that could not be shaken, Jamie ventured to the house, ignoring the uneasy glances of the few townsfolk left. As she approached the front gate, she could feel the weight of the place, an oppressive, suffocating energy that made the air feel thick. The wind had stopped completely, and the only sound was the beating of her own heart. The iron gates creaked as she pushed them open, the hinges groaning as if protesting her presence. She hesitated at the threshold for only a moment before stepping inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The house loomed before her, its silhouette like a twisted monument to something long forgotten, and as she walked toward it, the temperature seemed to drop, a sharp chill gnawing at her skin. She reached the front door, and it opened with an unsettling ease. As if it had been waiting for her. Jamie stepped inside, her flashlight casting weak shadows on the rotting wood and decaying walls. The house was deathly silent, save for the occasional creak of the timbers settling. She moved further into the house, her footsteps muffled by the dust on the floor, but something in the air felt wrong. She could feel it now, a presence, cold and malevolent, watching her from the darkness. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, like 1,000 unseen eyes trained on her every movement. "It's just your imagination," she thought, shaking off the growing sense of dread. "You're here to uncover the truth, Jamie. Don't let fear stop you." But as she continued deeper into the house, her flashlight flickered, casting the room in brief flashes of light. With each flicker, The shadows seemed to grow longer, closer. The house was shifting around her, the walls twisting like they were alive, breathing. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped again, and her breath became visible in the air. Suddenly, the faint sound of a child's laughter echoed through the house. Jamie froze. It was faint at first, like the sound of a child playing a game, but it was wrong. The laughter was too hollow, too high-pitched, and it echoed in a way that sounded unnatural, bouncing off the walls and reverberating in Jamie's ears. She spun around, her flashlight darting from corner to corner, but there was no one there. Just an echo. It's just an echo. But the laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, closer. It was no longer the sound of a playful child. It was twisted. The voice was distorted, almost as if something else was imitating the laughter. Something that had been trapped here for far too long. As Jamie backed away, trying to regain control of her racing heartbeat, she felt the ground beneath her shift. The walls groaned, and she realized, too late, that she wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. The floor beneath her cracked open. Screaming, Jamie tried to jump back, but it was too late. The floor gave way, and she fell, tumbling into a dark abyss, her scream swallowed by the darkness. When she hit the ground, it was soft. Too soft. The ground wasn't earth. It was wet, slick, like flesh. She gasped, scrambling to her feet, and her flashlight fell from her hand, illuminating a room that shouldn't have existed. Weeks later, a new rumor began to spread through Black Hollow. There were signs that the house was growing. The whispers said it had taken more than just the souls of the unfortunate who entered. It had started to feed on the living, on the townspeople. No one was safe. And in the heart of that cursed house, the hunger continued to pulse. The house had been feeding, growing stronger with each soul it consumed. But something in the air had shifted. In the midst of all the terror, a small glimmer of hope remained, though few knew it. Zoe, a local woman who had lived in Black Hollow all her life, knew the house better than most. She had heard the stories growing up. Whispers from the elders who had long warned her of its evil. But she had never believed it, not until the disappearances started, and the strange, unexplainable things began to happen. Zoe was different, though. She had an ancient connection to the land, a lineage tied to the old protectors of the town. Her grandmother had always told her that the house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it could be killed. But only if one had the courage to face the heart of darkness, to destroy the thing that kept it feeding on souls. Zoe, determined to put an end to the nightmare that had plagued her town for generations, returned to the house one stormy night, when the wind howled like a tortured soul. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The house wasn't going to let her destroy it without a fight. But she had no choice. Armed with an ancient ritual passed down through her family, Zoe made her way through the fog, past the rotting gate and up to the house's decaying door. It creaked open on its own as if inviting her in. Inside, the house seemed to breathe. The walls were shifting, the shadows stretching unnaturally, reaching out toward her. But Zoe wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had come prepared. She had come to end it. The air was thick with the heavy scent of decay, and the distant sound of whispers filled her ears, promising torment, promising an eternity of pain. But Zoe pushed forward, moving through the house with determination, her feet guided by an unseen force. When she reached the heart of the house, the dark cavern beneath the floor, she felt the full weight of its evil. The heart, a massive pulsating thing, throbbed like the very core of the world, feeding on the souls trapped inside the walls. The eyes, the hundreds of empty, black eyes, stared at her from every direction, watching, waiting. Zoe took a deep breath, and with steady hands, she pulled out the ritual book, its pages yellowed and fragile. She had memorized the words her grandmother had taught her, but seeing them written here, in this place of pure evil, made her blood run cold. Still, she did not falter. With a voice that rang clear and strong in the suffocating darkness, Zoe began to chant the ancient words. The air around her seemed to twist and churn, and the heart in the center of the cavern throbbed violently. The eyes narrowed, as if sensing what she was about to do. The ground beneath her feet shook, and a low growl rumbled through the cavern as the walls began to close in, trying to crush her. But Zoe didn't stop. She continued chanting, her voice steady despite the terror surrounding her. The walls screamed as the ritual took hold. The house recoiled as if in pain, the dark energy that had held it together starting to unravel. The heart pulsed in fury, but it was too late. Zoe had reached the final words. With a blinding flash of light, the house let out a deafening scream. The walls cracked and splintered, the floor buckled beneath Zoe's feet. The heart gave one final, desperate throb, and then it stopped. The cavern collapsed, the house's dark energy evaporating into the air like smoke. The walls groaned one last time, and then fell silent. Zoe stood in the middle of the ruins, her heart racing but her spirit unbroken. The house was no more. The evil that had plagued Black Hollow for so long was finally gone. Long before the town of Black Hollow was founded, the land on which it sat was a place of ancient rituals and forgotten beliefs. The area had once been a sacred ground to a now extinct cult, a group of mystics who worshipped dark, otherworldly beings they believed were tied to the very fabric of the earth. They called these beings the Eldritch Ones, entities of unimaginable power that thrived on fear, pain, and suffering. The cult built a temple deep in the woods, a place hidden from the world. In the center of this temple stood a massive stone altar, upon which the cult performed horrific rituals to invoke the Eldritch Ones. These rituals involved the blood sacrifices of both humans and animals, each one made to strengthen the connection between the mortal world and the dark entities they worshipped. For centuries, the cult thrived in secret, growing in power as they drew closer to their malevolent gods. But the greed for power was their undoing. In their arrogance, they attempted a final, forbidden ritual, one that would open a permanent gateway between the Eldritch Ones and their realm. It was a ritual so dark that it could rip apart the very fabric of reality. The cult believed that by offering up the very heart of the earth, a living entity bound to the land, they could unleash the full might of the Eldritch Ones. The ritual went horribly wrong. On the night of the ritual, the cultists gathered around the altar, their chants rising in a crescendo, their eyes wide with madness. But as they completed the incantation, the earth itself began to shake violently. The ground cracked open, and the temple collapsed into the depths of the abyss below, swallowed by the earth. At the center of the wreckage, the heart they had tried to summon, the dark, pulsing force of the Eldritch Ones, was freed. But instead of bestowing power upon the cult, it consumed them, feeding on their fear and despair as they perished. The ritual had succeeded in opening the gateway, but not in the way the cultists had imagined. Instead of allowing the Eldritch Ones to step into the world, the ritual had created a prison, a tear between dimensions, where the heart of the Eldritch Ones remained trapped. The house was built years later, long after the cult's destruction, on the very land where the temple had stood. The town's founders, unaware of the dark history beneath their feet, constructed the house as a grand mansion for a wealthy family. But they unknowingly built it directly over the site where the cult had performed their final, disastrous ritual. The heart, still bound beneath the house, began to grow. It fed on the fear and suffering of anyone who stepped too close to it, using the house as a vessel to reach the world above. The Eldritch Ones, though trapped in another dimension, began to influence the land, sending out whispers to those who lived in the house or dared to explore its depths. The more souls the heart consumed, the stronger it grew, until it was able to manipulate the house itself, warping reality and twisting the minds of those who entered. For generations, the house became a place of death. People came to it, drawn by the legends, the thrill of the unknown, or the twisted need to conquer fear. And one by one, they were claimed by the evil beneath. It wasn't just a haunted house. It was the very prison of an ancient evil that had fed on fear for centuries, growing stronger with each soul it consumed. The sheriff, the townspeople, Lena, Greg, and even Jamie, they were all drawn into the house because of the curse that lingered from the ancient ritual. The house wasn't simply haunted. It was a living, breathing entity, powered by the heart of the Eldritch Ones. And until someone with the strength to face it head-on came along, it would continue to grow, consuming more and more souls, feeding the darkness. But Zoe, with her connection to the land and the ancient knowledge passed down from her grandmother, was